Okay, terrific. So today we have you gentlemen in here, and then we have some folks as well on the phone. So what we're going to talk about is going to be property management. First off, I'm Melanie French, and I am the CEO of RREAF Residential and Dream Communities. I have been in the multifamily business since I was 18. So a number of years. I started as a weekend leasing consultant and probably can tell you that I have seen so many things through this business. And with that, it makes it exciting for me to take this opportunity to share a little bit about property management with all of you. Have any of you in here ever worked in property management by chance? Okay, well, that's a good starting point. So hopefully you'll find some tidbits in here that will be helpful for you as you go through, whether you're on the real estate side or on the investment side. So in doing so, what I wanted to first talk about is the fact that property management does have a big purpose. So why do you have property management? The primary reason is to help increase the value of the real estate for the owners and the asset management. Of course, you oversee a number of different types of properties. It's not just one. A lot of folks think about property management as just being the multifamily sector or the single-family rentals. But really, it is more detailed than that. You can actually have property management in all the residential side, whether it's single-family residences, townhomes, multifamily, or condos even, and HOAs, which many of you have actually probably been involved with in the past. Commercial, you have commercial and retail are both considered commercial on the real estate side. And when you go into that, it's the malls, it is the strip centers, it's the small mixed-use type businesses as well. They also have brokerages, you have the real estate offices, and now you're seeing a lot of the work, like the WeWork places, and that's a big new kind of a commercial space currently. Then you've got the industrial, which runs into the heavier manufacturing. It runs into all of the warehouses for the trucks, into some factories. Somebody manages every one of those buildings. Then you've got the special purpose. Now, with RREAF Holdings, one of the business ventures is with the RV world, as you've heard in some of the past sessions. And on the RV resorts, that would fall under the special purpose area. It's more of a resort type property management, much like hotels, much like if you had a campground even. And the RV resorts that we're building are on that very high end factor. So those are going to be a property management system all to its own. But at the end of the day, you're still managing property, you're still managing people that touch property, and you're still managing those that pay you rent. So today, we're going to talk primarily about multifamily. Were you aware that 38% of all the people in the United States live in apartment homes or multifamily dwellings? That's up from about 27% in 2016. But to meet demand, we need another 4.3 million rental homes in order to meet the demand by 2030. That is a lot. In fact, roughly we're going to have 266,000 units built every year just to stay on top of the demand. We nationwide, the multifamily sector accounts for $485 billion in rent paid. That's a lot, which is why you see so many people that want to get into the investment side of real estate, want to get into the management side, and also want to make the money and ensure that the assets are managed properly. 40.3 million people live in the 21 million apartments that are out there. And much like any city, I tell our teams that like any city, when you have an apartment community, you're going to have things that happen. If it happens in a city, it will happen in that community. One thing that we saw during the pandemic, for example, is multifamily communities. When everybody was staying home, think about it. You've got a 300-unit community. That means you typically are going to have around 900 to 1,000 residents. And with those residents, It means that is 900 to 1,000 people that can come in your office at any given time with no appointment, can call you, can all come in one day. And during the pandemic, we found out that our amenities aren't really built for 24/7 use, which is what they got. So if it happens, it will happen in an apartment community. What does that mean? I call it the fire, flood, blood, and poop. Okay? Now, how does that fall in? Well, the reality is you're going to have the fires, you're going to have the floods, you're going to have accidents, you're going to have injuries, and you have pets. So the pets account for the P word because your residents won't always clean up after themselves. We're going to see violent crimes and murders. We see kidnappings. We see drownings. The managers that are out there today managing your multifamily don't just sit in an office. You'd be surprised and probably a little frightened. I always say, that apartment life means real life. That's what the reality is, because every person that lives in an apartment and pays you rent has their whole family based there. This just in 2021, more than 81,500 apartment fires occurred. That's not the number of units. That's the number of fires. And that accounted for more than $1.72 billion in damages. I found it interesting. 400 residents died, 3,100 were injured. And that was just in 2021. So when we take and look at property management, you need to take a pointed look at the strategy up front. So for each of you and the audience that's watching, when you think about property management, it's more than just managing the day-to-day. It really is about, how do I make profit? How do I increase the ROI and increase the value of the asset? That's really what it's about. That takes a strategy. It takes having a good property manager and not necessarily a mom and pop. So why? What does that mean? Property management entails, as this little slide shows, it's not just the rent collection, but it's also the signing of the leases. It's making sure the mortgage, utilities, insurance are paid on time. It's making sure the repairs and maintenance are handled for the residents. It's also about preventive maintenance, and it's about taking care of that asset preservation. Then you have security deposits, yes. Each security deposit, for example, is controlled by the state in whether or not you have to pay interest on it, whether or not it has to be kept into a separate account from your operating. And in some states, you're even required to pay interest on a security deposit you hold every 6 months. It's up to your property manager to know that and to know the legal ramifications to keep you as an owner and investor out of trouble. You have us as property managers to keep you out of trouble. So that is one of the big factors of when you hire a company and you want to hire a reputable one. So good property management, and I love this slide because in reality, it influences what your future revenue is. From the day you sign a contract with a property management company and from the day you actually go to start due diligence on an asset, everything from that day one will influence your future revenue 3 years down the road. And that's what makes the difference, okay? So how do we do it at RREAF Residential and at Dream Communities? Well, what we do as property leadership is we want to prepare to win. That first means you have to embrace change. Why do I say embrace change for property management? Any ideas? Okay. Well, what it means is that from the day you step onto that community, there's going to be a change, whether it's a management change, whether it is a change in the business strategy that the ownership and asset management has, but change is inevitable, okay? So always, that's what you start with. And then you go into the identification. It's always about identifying solutions. I do not want our teams to make excuses. If we mess it up, we own it, okay? The key is not to mess it up. And if we do what we are supposed to, and we really execute to plan and define the strategy up front, then we don't have nearly as many problems to identify because we're proactively taking care of them. We're always wanting to improve resident and customer experience. every one of you in this room and those on the call actually will certainly be adept at the social media. So you know now, how many of you actually go to a restaurant that you don't already have looked up reviews when you're in a new city? I know I do. I look at the reviews, and that's part of how I choose. So can you imagine that with all of the apartments out there, 38% of the people in the United States living in apartment homes, every one of those individuals are going to research. That's why resident customer experience is so important. The big factor in success is people. This is a people business. People are the key. Your team on site is the key. That is the single most important factor in whether you make money or whether you manage well, is about the staff you have on site. And we'll talk more about that later when we talk about good money versus bad money and saving versus expending. So let's talk about the basics. In my mind, when we go into property management, it's a really very simple calculation to me. It's managing the business, it's leading the people, it's exceeding customer expectations, driving the revenue acceleration and the revenue growth, and thinking like an owner. It really is that simple. It's about manage, lead, exceed, think like an owner. When you manage your business, and I'm going to go through all these basics for you because a lot of what we're talking about today applies to more than just property management. It applies to any business that you take on now or later, and it applies to the work you'll be doing elsewhere. First off, people and presence do matter. That first impression that your parents told you about matters. Your team is your brand. Bottom line, whoever it is that you have working on that community is the brand. Think about it. Your residents don't know necessarily who RREAF Residential is. When your residents are thinking about how much rent they want to pay, they're basing that on the people in your office and on the asset they see. I always tell my teams, okay, are you going to give a check to the person at McDonald's that rings up your order? Perfectly nice person. They do a great job, have great customer service. But do you go into that fast food restaurant and say, after you just meet them and you just ordered your sandwich, oh, by the way, let me give you a $20,000 check? Anybody do that? No. But that's what we're asking people to do in the apartment industry, okay? We meet somebody, our team spend 15 minutes with them, maybe 30, maybe an hour if they do a really good tour. And then we're asking them to give us at least $20,000. How do I come up with that number? Well, you think about it. Rent is the single largest expense that most people have to pay out of their paycheck. So when we are leasing and selling an apartment, we are selling someone a contract for anywhere from 20 to, if you do a 2-year lease, 40,000. So when you stop and think about what the business is, it's more than just the $1,500 a month rent. We're asking them to give us a large check. And you want to know when you give a check that the person you're giving it to is capable of having your money. You always want to anticipate the unexpected. We'll talk about that some with due diligence because that's where it starts. Prevention measures such as, let me just tell you now, there are plenty of problems that happen on site. For example, dryer vents. Our asset management team has us cleaning out dryer vents on all of the communities this year. We do that probably every third year. Same thing with cleaning chimneys. I've had owners in the past that said, no, I don't want to spend the money to do that. Well, let's be honest. You're going to pay for it now or you're going to pay for it later. But at some point, you will pay for it. One of the largest reasons for fires in apartment communities, dryer vents and your bathroom vents. Because rarely do anybody clean them, rarely do they replace them. Those are two of the largest factors. So don't pay later by having a fire, pay soon by getting them cleaned out and maintaining them. That's what the owner is paying us as a property manager to think about, okay? We don't want you as an owner thinking about it. When you're leading the people, we talked a little bit about that, but it's about setting clear expectations from day one. How do you build your organization so that it can grow and grow naturally in accordance as your business grows? It won't do you any good as an owner or as a manager on the property management side if somebody comes to you and says, I want you to take on my 10 communities, and you go, oh, I can't. I don't have enough people. So you've got to be able to know your projections, know what your income projections are going to be, as well as your expenses, and then manage that scalability. We look at whether or not we centralize or decentralize services. Headcount, payroll is a large expense in property management. In fact, one of the largest. Between your utilities, your mortgage, and your payroll, those are your 3 largest. So there are only so many places that you can cut down on expenses, and by centralizing some task, we're able to save on some of the payroll side. You have to make decisions on do you use contractors versus doing work in-house. All of that is part of leading the people. And then when you have the right people, you actually are able to offer the customer service that exceeds expectations. When you exceed expectations for customers, you are beginning on that day to generate revenue for the next 24 months because those customer reviews are worth gold. Not only that, when somebody lives with you and if they do decide to move out, they still have the opportunity to influence future customers by referring. So exceeding customer experience every time and customer expectations will create a value that inherently residents will pay more for. They pay more when they feel like they're getting their money's worth and when they are happy with what's happening at their community. We talked about employees being your brand and enjoying the work. Well, that is so important. Everybody wants to come into somewhere and see somebody that's happy. If you go into an apartment office to pick up your package and somebody ignores you and never looks up at you, you don't feel very welcome, okay? So that's where it comes. That is the beginning of looking at opportunities that might drive revenue that other people don't think about. I listed a few here, and I said remove the fear, try the unexpected. I say that because inherently when you are in property management, you're going one day to have a manager that you're going to say, hey, why don't we try this great little fence and have a pet yard? And the manager's going to go, oh, no, our residents don't want to do that. Okay. You have to remove, as a leader, you have to remove the fear that your team members have so that they can see the vision you see. This small pet fence, we often can get $150 more a month just because we created a small area that a resident can let their toddler out in or their dog without them being on a leash. Okay, something to think about. But you also want to think about the strategic aspect of how does that fence affect your curb appeal. I personally will never put the fences on the front of the property where your heavy drive-by is because I don't want it to affect that. What happens when that resident decides to leave 10 children's toys out? So be strategic in where you put them. Residents now love gardens, you know, the healthy eating, the HelloFresh, all these things that are being sent to residents. Well, we've got to find a way to capitalize on that ourselves. And if we have residents and we can build, when we build a new community, if we build a little planter box on a patio, it's golden because residents can plant their herb gardens, their flowers. They want to have that green thumb. They'll pay more. For satellites and grill permits, if you buy a C property, you go out tomorrow, you do due diligence on a C grade property or a B grade, chances are you'll see satellite dishes. A lot of times those have been there for years. Nobody's managed them. So I put into place in a past company, we're going to do it on this one, but we're very fortunate at RREAF. We don't have a lot of satellite dishes. But when you run into that, if you send your residents a notice, tell them there's a $75 fee annually, and they have to have a permit on that dish by set day, then after that day, you can go and remove all the ones that don't have the permits. easiest way to clean up your property, actually get you more money because it looks cleaner when drive-bys go through so you can raise rent. You want to make sure the residents feel good. Spending $25 or $50 on an anniversary gift for a resident before they even sign their renewal, it's worth it in the long run. Because if you send it ahead of time, then when they get that renewal that you're going to charge them another $150 in rent, the last thought on their mind is, oh, I love those whiskey tumblers they sent me. Okay? You leave a positive, and then you try to increase the rent. So when you think like an owner, all those things we just talked about, that's thinking like an owner because you're taking care of the owner's money. And that's what we want you to do. That's part of your internship here with RREAF Holdings, is really about how do I think like an owner so I can enhance my earning potential for the next 40 years. That's what it is. That's thinking forward. What does one vacant really cost you? You got to hire well. We talked about that. There's some simple ones. Accept online payments. When we have a property that has online payments only, your delinquency is inherently less. Those are the communities that will close out at 1% or less delinquency. Because your residents pay online, it's already kind of a preset. You allow them to bring the rent into the office, then what happens is, oh, I've got the kid's birthday. I'm going to use a little extra. I'll just pay my rent a few days late. You want to avoid that. And we've taken some measures to do that. You want to always ask questions and then ask more questions. Trust, but verify. You want to verify that the property management company you've hired is doing what you're paying them to do. Okay? There's a fine line between asset management and property management. The asset manager is the owner's representative. And so they are paid to ask questions of us as property managers to make sure that we're managing and driving that business strategy to the best of our ability like they want to. So what does one vacant really cost? Well, let me tell you. If you have a vacant home that's worth $1,500 a month, okay, so somebody moves out, you want it to take only 5 to 7 days to have that home painted, cleaned, and made ready. In a lot of cases, it'll take 2 weeks or longer. So it's important that you find ways to cut that number of days. It's a work in progress for us at our company, and I think it is for every company out there. But those days that you're getting that home ready, that you're taking the trash out that somebody left in it, because somebody has to do that, the broken furniture that the college kids leave every year, somebody has to take it out. It's usually our maintenance and service teams. So when we do that, all those days cost us money. Think about it like this. Every day it's vacant is going to cost you, depending on the property, between $30 and $40 a day. So when you have to go into that vacant home of $1,500 a month, then you need to add your advertising cost on it. You need to add the utilities on it because you're paying electricity while it's being made ready. You have to add on to it the man hours and the hourly wage of the person that goes to show that home to prospective residents multiple times. And you have to add the cost in, the cost of laminate flooring, the cost of new light fixtures, the cost of cleaning. To paint an apartment, if you're only painting it one color, may cost you $600. To clean it, $225. To make repairs, more. At the end of the day, that $1,500 for 1 month, chances are that you will have spent $5,000 to $10,000, unless you're able to keep your occupancy at 95%, because otherwise that home sits vacant for 30 days or 60 days. So it's important that you turn homes quickly, that you make sure your staff is leasing them quickly, and that you execute, because it begins with your team and all of these things that we're talking about. Is this answering some questions so far for you and giving you some food for thought? Okay, good. So let's give you some thought here, real world. What is it that people think apartment managers do? Well, they think they collect rent once a week or once a month. They think they just spend time chatting with friends, answering service requests. They think they work 9 to 5, 5 days a week. They think they plan parties. They don't really know. They think that they ignore resident noise complaints because they don't want to deal with it. And they think that they're just mean and that they don't work on weekends and holidays. Well, in reality, that property manager that you met does not get free rent and utilities. They pay rent just like you do. Every team member does. What they really do is they act as a collection agent and an enforcer. They knock on doors. They go into homes. They work nights. They work weekends. It is rare for a community manager to work less than 10 hours a day when they work. That's rare, okay? It's not a 9 to 5 job. It also is they are on call 24/7. Recently, we took over management of a new community on a Friday. Okay, 3:15 in the morning, we had an entire building burned down, 24 units, a lightning strike. Who gets that call? The manager and the service team. So they're there that whole night dealing with that, and then they still have to be there for work, okay? And they're still taking care of the residents. That's the real world. The real world is someone calls and wants a well check. There's a drug bust. There's a shooting. All of those things we talked about earlier, that's what it really is that the property management does. So when people come in and say, oh, I need this report in the next 10 minutes, well, what they're forgetting is that any of those 900 or 1,000 residents can come in. They're standing there in front of them, okay? Once, as a community manager, I was sitting at my desk in Long Beach, Mississippi, and I had this gentleman walk in. He had a black plastic bag. So I stood up to greet him because I'm customer friendly. Hi, how may I help you? I'm Melanie. He takes his plastic bag. He opens it, true story, dumps it on my desk. It's all these fish head and fish guts. I looked at him and said, thank you. How can I help you? He said, your residents keep dumping these on my property. So he returned them, okay? How I handled that moment could have escalated or de-escalated. But I realized I'm representing an owner. I have to be professional. But that's the real life of property management. Service teams stand in sewer and dig out stuff, okay? We pick up the grounds. That's real life. But what we want to focus on, we want to focus on our KPIs because that's where we make money. That's where we do our jobs for the owner and investor. And these are the ones that I would say are the top 10 that I like to measure with our teams, okay? You want to measure your team member and customer engagement both, not just the resident customer, but your team members too, because again, we talked about them being the heart. Resident quality, that means, is your team adhering to the resident standards? Because when you have a property manager that doesn't take care of that, doesn't do background checks, doesn't go back and every quarter run a sex offender list to see if somebody's on your property you didn't know, when you don't do that, then your resident quality and your demographics decline. And when other residents see those residents not taking care of their balcony, their patio, then they don't take care of it. And so all of that, whether or not you make sure they make the right money, you make sure they qualify, it affects your income on the future as well. There are some critical points, and the resident quality being one of them, that can cost you money rather than make you money, okay? We talked about seeing opportunities, and this is a great money-making opportunity. If we know what our customer is, resident life cycle is, what their demographic is, do you have a laptop and latte as your customer demographic that you want to draw in? Do you have the family? Because all of those matter when you're making strategic decisions, because that's how you decide what amenities you have. That's how you decide whether or not you put a playground on, okay? If I've got a high-rise urban living, well, I typically will have a laptop and latte resident base, somebody that wants to spend their money not on cooking, even though they have a nice apartment home. They want to spend their extra money on going out, socializing with friends, going to restaurants, going to the night, okay? So I I put a laundry room in there, not going to get used. Put in a playground, probably not going to get used, okay? So you want to give what your residents want because they'll pay you more money when you have met their needs. They will pay more money when they see an inherent value, okay? When they feel safe. We talked about how COVID impacted some of that. But always thinking and making good decisions versus bad decisions will build loyalty with residents. And when you have loyalty with residents, they stay. If you can have a new resident come in and instead of giving them a concession, give them a gift card, send them over to the home store. Because once they start nesting and they start decorating, you've got a bigger chance they're going to stay. And it's harder for them to want to move out. So take those opportunities for revenue. You already know about first impressions and introductions. You know you've got to have curb appeal, grounds upkeep. One of the biggest pet peeves I have is I go on a site and I'll see the front monument sign and it has weeds, okay? I'm the person that once had a landscaper who did not understand the weed mentality, so I pulled one of the tall ones up and I FedExed it to him. You know what? He got the point. And the property looked better because of it. So you want your first impressions to be good. Flowers, that is an area where some owners will not spend money on colorful flowers. They think it saves them money. It really costs them money because that's one of the first things that people drive by and see. When you drive down the street and you pass, say an apartment community or a high rise, you pass it every day. You know, you get used to it, but when you see a different color or you see something new, then you actually start memorizing it in your mind. So perception becomes reality. The perception you want them to see is important. But more importantly, what residents want is the experience during their residency. They want reliability. They want to know that you're going to do what you say you are. If you say you're going to repair and make repairs in the home, then they want you to do that. They want you to do it timely. They want you to be respectful, not let their pets out, not leave dirty footprints in their bathrooms when you take care of a leak. They want service responsiveness. They want to know that the amenities they're paying for work, okay? When you have a property manager, it's that property management's job to make sure that when they're going to do pool repairs and pool resurfacing, they don't do it at the time it's going to overlap with the opening of the pool. Residents are furious when they've waited the whole year for the pool to open and suddenly we decide 2 weeks before Memorial Day, we're going to resurface it. So think ahead, think like a customer. That is the key manage here. Good isn't always cheap. Cheap isn't always good. I love that. You want to find opportunities to create value in what you use. So look at it like this. Something as simple as an air conditioning compressor. There are a number of different brands. If your service manager and technician, if they go and they buy the cheapest one, okay, it may work for a little while. But there are a lot of areas that you don't think about. For example, you don't think about the fact that, yes, you now have a different type of compressor or condenser, and because of that, you have to have different parts for it. Your team has to know how to fix it, and if you're not careful, you'll have 7 or 8 different kinds on the property. No consistency. You've saved money, but it may not last as long, and it's going to cost you more in having to keep all of those different parts and have people that know how to work on all of them. Likewise, when you choose light fixtures, it's great to choose light fixtures that are gorgeous, but you also want to think about the repair cost because with apartment management, your biggest cost after the 3 we talked about are what it costs you in repairs. So you want to put items and materials in your homes that are going to cost you less a year and a half from now. That's what you want. Don't pick a light fixture that has 5 different panes of glass in it, okay? Because what that means is each one of those can break. Pick one that's simple, looks nice, easy to repair, and easy on cost. Think forward when you're making decisions. mini blinds. Many people have had mini blinds in apartments. The little, the little small ones. Have you ever driven through a community, and I urge you to do this the next time you're out and about, drive through and look at the windows and see how many of them are damaged and torn, okay? That takes away the value and the increase in rent that you can obtain, because when somebody drives through, it doesn't look good. It doesn't look like somewhere you want to live. So spend a little more money doing the 2-inch faux blinds. The cats don't tear them up. The kids don't tear them up. They last, and they'll last for 3-4 years without any replacement. Whereas a mini blind, you're replacing every single time a unit turns over. One of the reasons that property management companies and asset managers and owners have gone away from carpet is because carpet ends up being replaced every 18 months. So if you go with the laminate, it's a longer term. Now, it also costs 3 times the amount that the carpet does the first time. So when you make decisions, you need to think long-term versus short-term. And that's what this slide is about. For example, some different things you can think about, and different owners want to do it differently. If you have a C community, it's not uncommon now when a new owner goes in that they remove the garbage disposals. And the reason for that is an extremely frequent call for people that have problems. Different cultures, different demographics don't always understand the use of it, and that takes more service time for things like disposers. Now, if you have an A asset, you probably don't want to remove it. But again, know your demographics and know your business strategy. The toilet tissue holders, if you go into an older community, you'll see toilet tissue holders, you'll see all the repairs for the towel holders, all those things, okay? One of the reasons now that you are seeing in some new homes, they don't put those things in because later you're going to have to replace it. And you're going to have to repair the sheetrock. So think forward looking and future of what you want. When you do a deadbolt, the reason we went to deadbolt locks with passage is because when you had the knob lock with the key, residents would like the bottom lock and not the deadbolt. Then they're upset when somebody breaks into the apartment. Fine, we solve it. We don't want our service teams having to rekey 2 different locks. I want them to rekey 1. Now they do the deadbolt only. So those are ways that you're going to think about how you make money in the future. At the end of the day, we've talked about when first impressions come in. We've talked about what property and people, how important they are. We've also talked about the customer experience. It is during that experience that people decide, do they stay or do they go? What is the perceived value for money? You want to know that. We talked about former residents referring in the future. So that resident that moved in that gave us that $20,000 check, they could help you make $100,000 in revenue because they've referred others or they've stayed longer. That's where the value comes in. You want them to be sad to leave, not happy. You want it to be a smooth move out and a smooth return of their money because that's their last impression. And nothing is worse than saying, oh, I loved it while I lived there, but boy, when I moved out, they kept my whole deposit and I didn't even do anything wrong. Folks, let the $50 oven not being cleaned go. Give them that $50. Now, if they've done real damage, charge them. Okay? So that's where decisions impact your wins and your income. Consistency in staff. Yes, people are important, but it's that consistency. When you have a staff that has been in place and a manager that's been in place for a long period, that community will typically run better, make more money, and be more efficient. Okay? Not only that, your residents are happier because they know the people in the office. They view them as their friends. When I have a manager turnover, typically I know my operation is going to be less than for 6 months. We will feel it for 6 months. Oftentimes when you have a new manager, you have high turnover in the other positions within the first 90 days. So you've got to think ahead, know how to manage that. When your property manager decides they want to help you and hire somebody quickly because they don't want to have to sit at the property themselves, that's not helping you. It only helps you if they hire the right people, and sometimes you have to wait for that. So versus paying $45,000 to a manager on 150 units or paying $60,000. You're paying for the experience. You're going to get that $5,000 or $10,000 back if you've hired the right person. If you've hired the wrong person, even if it's at a lower salary, you're going to pay it twice. Pay now or pay later. It's still the same. You've got to know your customers, but you've also got to know the competitors. So I want to do just a little bit on the beginning and all the factors in it, because when some of you have been in these sessions each week, you've learned about legal, you've learned about the deal making. Well, communication up front between that owner and asset manager and investor, as well as the property manager, is key. So you know that you've got the due diligence plans. I'm sure you guys have seen some of those. Well, knowing the owner's plans is important, because up front, when you go in as a property manager, if you know what that budget is, then you already know these are the critical life safety issues we need to do in the first 12 months. These are the ones that we'd like to do, and these are the luxury, okay? Know your owner's business plan and their strategy. Know what pro forma they want 5 years from now, because you're going to start day one trying to achieve that by knowing. Then you're going to look at the 12-month history. I use a T12 report more than I ever use a monthly financial, because the T12 tells me the trends. With that, I can go through and look at specific areas, and we can look at where are your high cost. When I look at the high cost, if I saw carpet was my highest cost, then I may make the decision with that asset manager to go through and not do carpet, because we know we're going to keep spending that money, okay? It's also important on things like, for example, older communities a lot of times will resurface countertops. It's cheap, so they do it. Well, you're going to have to resurface it again or replace it when that resident moves out and it's damaged, okay? So if you spend the money up front for granite, say, if you can get good pricing, it makes sense, spend the money for granite, then you avoid resurfacing, you avoid the burns that happen when people set their pots on them, and you avoid the laminate disasters. And residents feel like it's a higher end, so they're willing to pay more for it. Even if it's $10, it's more. So, but know your ROI. You want to understand that pro forma we talked about. So all of this goes through that. At the end of the day, you've got to know your competition. You want to understand. I like, for example, to look at my comps and know the bottom and know the top and figure out where is our community. Is it in the middle? Because when I do competitors, I don't want to know the competitors I am competing with today, because I want us to improve on the business plan and the strategy, and we want to be above where we are today. So I'm looking at my competitors that are 2 steps ahead, because that's where I want to go. Even if I can't get there 100%, because I can't necessarily compete with the brand new, but I've got something brand new doesn't. I've got the right team in place. That's worth money. So as we have finished this out, we've covered a lot. Any questions? Okay. Well, you can reach me at mfrench@reefresidential.com. Ask me anytime, and I thank you very much for your time.